Hello, hello, hello. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of TA Tech Unboxed. Each episode, we're speaking to the best in class software providers from the tools that have been built for us, the talent acquisition community. We're chatting to people behind the tools, why they chose to build things for this crazy world. And if you're watching on YouTube, we're going to look inside the box a little bit. We've challenged the guys to get as close to 7 minutes in the demo. I'm Chris Haslam and my co host, Mr. Darren Bush.
Hi, Chris. How are you doing?
Okay, who do we have on the show today?
So, Chris, today you've got Brady Franks, head of sales at Applied. He's here to discuss how Applied removes bias from the hiring process.
And I want to show you some of the functionality that's ensuring organizations that are hiring not only get features of a best-in-class ATS from sourcing through to hire with Applied, but actually functionality that's focused entirely on building a super inclusive and predictive and objective hiring process that not only strips bias out from how hiring decisions are being made, but ensures that you're testing for skill set, you're stripping out names, background, identifying information that triggers 180 odd biases when hiring decisions are made, ensures you're interviewing fairly, and ultimately means you're making the best hiring decisions that you can, and you're not overlooking candidates that can do the jobs that you're hiring in, which is what we do with the vast majority of the organizations that we support. We're going to be looking at a few things in the next couple of minutes. So the first, for lots of TAs and lots of TA teams from Pfizer's and What3Words and ASOS's team, they use our standalone job description tool. So we'll touch on that. And then we'll spend the most part of the session of our time here looking at how you can do a debiased CV screen, how you can use work sample assessments to shortlist, and finally, how you can actually complete your interviews in a way that's objective and structured so as to avoid groupthink and make sure that everybody has clarity over how to complete interviews before ultimately making a hiring decision. Now, if you're interested in touching on any of these in more depth, feel free to ping me a DM on LinkedIn or simply reach out to us via the Applied website. So very quickly, before we do dive into the system, why do we believe that the way in which hiring should be done needs to change? Put simply, traditional forms of assessment that you might look for in an unstructured interview or simply looking at years of experience via traditional CV screen, they're broken. And what we strongly follow is the behavioural science and the evidence that structured interviews, work samples, and things like job knowledge tests, they're a much better predictor of performance, which is why we emphasise introducing those to your process sooner. And through Applied, the idea is that you can break down the traditional indicators of performance like CVs and job descriptions into skills-based assessments, be it assessments of a candidate's resume or a work sample assessment, and then you can objectively assess candidates' ability, having stripped out factors that might impede your judgment. So what we'll be touching on is once you've built an inclusive job description that attracts as wide a pool of candidates as possible, what we'll be touching on is how that process is actually different through our tech. So the first thing that we do is we ideally get rid of the covering letter. And having got rid of the covering letter, we would argue that you should introduce work sample assessments, so questions that reflect the actual job that you're doing, as well as potentially a CV screen. And we will automatically anonymize those applications. So you won't be able to see any candidate's name because we know that that gets in the way of actually being able to assess candidates' ability through unconscious bias. Now then we'll chunk them together. So I'll show you how our tech makes it easy to review all work samples together, all question ones together, and all resumes together. So you're not context switching, looking at a single application. And then we randomize. And we randomize because the order that you review candidates has a real impact on their ability to actually be scored fairly. If a candidate is being scored last in a pile of work samples and Miss Aqua is being scored last every time, they're going to be scored down because of ordering effects. The same as if they're scored at the top of the assessment, they're at an advantage. And then ideally, you might have one person go in for all applications once using a 1 to 5 score Likert scale. But then for the at least average performing candidates and above, you want to use crowd wisdom. You want multiple people scoring so as to mitigate individual bias. And then what our tech does is pull together all of those scores. So in this instance, you have the scores from Mrs. Blue's resume, Mr. Gold's resume, as well as Miss Aqua's and all of their work samples. And you use that as the basis to make your decision on who to invite. through to interview. So in this instance, we invite Mrs. Blue and Miss Aqua, and again, we score those interviews objectively using a structured interview framework. And what we end up with is making a really effective and fair hiring decision. So enough of the background. Let's actually touch on the tech itself. We have a standalone job description tool, which you don't need to have our ATS to utilize. Typically, this is used by talent teams. So if I log in here to my account, what you can see is that I've got a job description that's locked and loaded and ready to go. Now, you might be familiar with other tech that does similar things. Our technology is based off sort of the rigorous academic research that's gone into looking at gendered language in job descriptions, which predominantly impacts the inclusion score, and then words, terms, phrases, sentences that might put candidates off from actually completing reading the job description and therefore won't get them to apply. That's covered in the conversion score. There's a lot of functionality here, but in a nutshell, words like analyze, we know are masculine coded, and we would encourage you to remove them. Instead, use words like study. Words like communicate are heavily feminine coded, and we would encourage you to remove them and use gender neutral alternatives. And what you'll see is this is a feminine coded job description. But as you improve the gender balance of the language, the score will go up. As such, conversion score, and there's a lot covered in the inclusion score, from where you might be inhibiting fresh talent, mandating too many must-haves, and you can see those under the requirements here, all the way through to overemphasizing educational background. There's a lot that you can do to improve a job description. The conversion score is entirely focused around how hard is this JD to read and understand. The reading burden is high, so we use what's called a Flesch-Kincaid score. There's a lot of synonyms. There's a lot of long sentences in here. There's also a lot of sort of wordy, highly intensive language being used. So we'd advise you to mitigate that by lowering your reading burden. And as you can see here, the word count is also touching 800 words, meaning the time to read is above the 2 to 3 that we would advise, with a lot of acronyms. So that's one of the bits of tech that we offer to ensure that your roles are actually attracting as diverse a pool of candidates as possible. Now, once they've applied, we'd like to think that you'd manage them through a system that's an ATS. We have our own, and this is the management page of it. You can see there's a funnel to manage the entire hiring process through. And for this account manager position at Waystar Royco, we've got 10 groups submitted. Now, of course, you can filter based off eligibility criteria very easily. So you wouldn't be progressing candidates through to be shortlisted that don't have right to work or don't fulfill the minimum requirements of the role. But once you've done that, you then have the ability to select, say, those 10 candidates and invite them to have their work samples reviewed. So the 1 or 2 questions that reflect actually assessing the job and passion and motivation, that replaces a less predictive cover letter. And there's a lot that you can do in managing those volumes there. Or you can have them sent to CV review with anonymization of CVs automatically on, and set focus questions around what you actually want to review the CV against predefined. And if we send those invitations out, then everybody gets access to their own dashboard as a hiring manager or a TA, where they can see the SIF questions and CVs that they have to review. I'm just going to show you what that shortlisting process looks like and how you review CVs as well as work samples before touching on how hiring decisions are made. So let's assume that we're reviewing resumes for this operations role. I get an email, I'm taken through to a basic onboarding process, and when I'm ready to actually start reviewing CVs, I can see the 3 focus questions that we've defined. So I'm not looking at this vague yes, no, maybe. I don't have a yes or no pile. I'm objectively assessing the quality of the resumes and the skill set of the candidates we're looking at. So this candidate here, they have skill set. This candidate here can contribute to a team in a meaningful way, and this candidate here has indication that they might perform well on the job based on what they've done in terms of accomplishments. And we simply work through, as an example, these 3 resumes here. And I'm just on the last one now. Once I get to the end, we can see that we've got a score by each candidate's application. And we use that score in addition to the SIF question, work sample score, to guide who we should invite to interview from those who are in the review section. So we're not progressing as many candidates to interview using applied as we traditionally might. We're being really objective with how we make hiring decisions. I'm just going to show you how these SIF questions are scored and what that process looks like. It's very similar to how you might review resumes. So same process as before. Andy's invited you to review candidates. There's a basic onboarding that everyone's taken through to, which I'm going to skip for the purposes of this. If I can. 1 second. Don't think I can skip it, so I'm just going to go through to the end. So I'm ready to review 10 answers across 2 questions. It's going to take 7 minutes. One of the things that we've introduced is the ability to see where candidates might be using AI on. This question we've said, why do you want to work at Waystar Royco? What skills do you want to work on in this role? And we've given an example of a generative AI answer here so that you can easily see if a candidate has plagiarized directly and copied and pasted an answer that's not theirs. So when we're ready to review, we can see here that we've got the question, the answer, or marking rubric and the answer. And all we're doing is scoring from 1 to 5 stars, how well we think this candidate's done. So this candidate's done 4 stars. We then have an answer, for instance, that we think may have plagiarized, because if we look at the AI response and we look at their answer, they're basically identical. What applied lets you do is really easily flag those candidates. So if we think this is a ChatGPT answer, we save the flag, that candidate's answer is flagged, and then we can see later on when reviewing applications how many other people have flagged. And then we continue on way, and we continue to review and mark work samples. So the order we're reviewing those work samples in is randomized. The questions are clearly chunked. We're looking at all question ones together. And again, at the end of that process, we end up with clear scores around how everybody's done, and therefore an objective indication on who to invite through to interview, which pulls through to something that looks like this. Very quickly, during the interview process, we want to ensure that everyone's being super objective. And if you imagine we chose to invite Charlie Bucket to interview, we want to make sure that we're asking Charlie Bucket the same questions as everybody else, and everybody's scoring against a marking rubric, because a structured interview is not any fairer, but it's more objective. So we've got 6 questions we might ask Charlie. Every interviewer will be using this in the process. And during the interview itself, we've got a space to leave notes after each question's asked. We've got a review guide that we would have defined, and we've got the ability to leave notes at the end that might be relevant to the role and to the interview itself. Once we submit that interview, again, we have a review score from shortlisting, and we have an interview score that's brought back together at the end once everybody's done those reviews. And what that should mean is if you've done your hiring right through our tech, you end up hiring a candidate that 60% of the time would have been overlooked through a traditional process and clearly has the skills required to do the job. So in this instance, we can see that Garth has scored highest overall on their application. And on the basis of that, following a discussion, we can choose to mark that candidate as hired. And that is a very high level introduction to applied and how our ATS works. If you're interested in learning more, feel free to pop on our website or drop me a message on LinkedIn. Thanks very much.
Yeah, yeah, really slick. It was excellent. It was, and we were looking at this at the moment where we're having volume roles, and how do we actually assess based on certain criteria based on the skills we're looking, transferable skills we're looking for, and how we can get them through the process. And this looks fantastic for that.
Thank you.
Poor
Yeah.
Poor Charlie.
He's out.
Yeah. There's a lot. I think we often stretch that, and
Yeah.
we can cover it in circa that can be a half an hour demo, but that's the tightest.
No, that's
I can
brilliant.
deliver it.
Yeah.
No, man, it covers good ground as well. I love in the I like the Cat Manfield original research that was done and the tool that they built. I've always been a big fan of that, but I've always liked that yours brings in readability, accessibility, time to read. Like, I think they're really important aspects of writing a job description. I think a lot of people talk about gendered language a lot, but you know, I suffer from dyslexia. Reading's difficult for me, so a number of syllables, sorry, not so much reading, but retaining and churning through things. Like, I often read the same line twice. So readability is really important
because you don't want to bore people as well.
Really
like people get bored. People don't want to read hardcore academic literature when they're applying for a job. You know?
It's lavender, isn't
Keeping
it?
it simple.
Totally.
A lot about
Love lavender.
Use the Run tool. It's a really cool tool that I pinged them actually to see if they've got a recruiter specific product that we can talk to them about, Darren. But what I like about theirs is they try to coach you on the speed at which you can consume the information and retain it is really important. And that is number of syllables, number of words, like time to read, formatting. All these things actually make, if you redeploy that to a job description, it makes it way more accessible to not just gender with language, but also, you know, people with disabilities, like people that suffer with invisible challenges. So love it.
Love it.
I think it's an excellent tool. I also, other particular point I really like, which I've not seen in any other assessment platforms to date, is I like the kind of sift. The randomising of answer questions.
Yeah.
So you answer all applicants question 1. I think that's brilliant because I genuinely believe that, you know, if I remember an applicant,
if you like this, you like the CV and you like one of the questions, you like question 2 and 3, even if they're not great, you're still gonna go like, I'll let them in. Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
Now I don't know who it is, and I'm just evaluating the question and answer from the assessment phase. I think that is.
No, it's Bradley. It's been really insightful, and thank you very much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. I've loved being here. I've loved it. Invite me to the next one.
It's been good fun,
Yeah.
and we kept it to an hour, just including a break.
Great.
So we've done all right.
Look, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chris.
No problem.
Thanks, Darren.
Thanks very much.
Big show, everyone. If you haven't, please subscribe, follow, download, or order on VHS. Most importantly, share with your TA friends. This is TA Unboxed, signing off.